In about 30 seconds, this video will be jumping into spoilers for the ending of Darling in the Franxx. The first things I'm going to show you aren't going to ruin this anime, except in the sense that once you see them, it's going to be impossible for you to take it seriously anymore, but I figure it's worth warning you anyway, and from that point forward, it will get increasingly spoilery. Later on, I'll also be discussing a certain similar element from the ending of Gurren Lagann that's not in itself a huge spoiler, unless we're talking physically, and is generally well known even to people who haven't watched the show, but some of you may still want to avoid seeing it. However, I can't avoid talking about that element because, well, just fucking look at this. This train wreck, which I once thought would be one of the best shows this year, didn't just go off the rails, it somehow D4C'd into an alternate reality where the rails never existed in the first place. Within the span of 24 episodes, I went from being so emotionally invested that at the series peak it made me cry, to being so emotionally detached that all of its attempts at serious drama had me crying with laughter. I'm aware that some people made it through the comedic brilliance that is Strelitzia True Apis with their respect and love for the series intact, and that's great. If you came away from Darling in the Franxx and think it's a 10 out of 10 flawless masterpiece made by Haruhi herself, I'm happy for you. I am glad that you could enjoy this anime and stay invested in the story straight to the end. But I couldn't, and this is my YouTube channel, so I'm gonna spend the next 20 minutes or so trying to figure out why that is. Buckle up, it's time to figure out what the HFIL happened to Darling in the Franxx. To be clear, we're not going to be playing Blame the Studio here because it's the individuals with creative control of the project, not the companies involved in its creation, who are ultimately most responsible for the direction that the series took, particularly writer-director Atsushi Nishigori. Two big criticisms that I've seen levied at Darling in the Franxx are that 1, the last arc of the story is really rushed, and 2, the series borrows pretty liberally from past Gainax and Trigger properties in, shall we say, less than original ways. I think that both of these complaints are valid, but they fail to get to the heart of what's really wrong with this show. Yes, obviously 3 episodes is a bit of a tight squeeze for an anime to suddenly make the transition from mostly small-scale ground conflicts to the massive starship fleet battles of a full-blown space opera, and cramming a full 2 years of space travel and sleepless, endless war for the fate of the universe, plus the gradual reformation of humanity and rebuilding of the Earth into 23 minutes is ambitious, to say the least. I'd say on par with the last episode of Charlotte in that regard. And it's definitely a problem that anyone who's seen a Gainax show before can call every twist in the series a light year away, including that sudden jump to space. But it's not like the series suddenly started cribbing from Gainax's playbook as it got bad and got to its Gainax ending. The good parts of the show also reuse and remix ideas that we've seen before. In fact, when it started, the homage was kind of part of the appeal for a lot of viewers, at least up to the point where it became obvious that the show was a little light on original ideas. And many of the show's best episodes and arcs move at a breakneck pace. I mean, after episode 14, fans were ready to riot over developments in Zero Two and Hero's relationship that were resolved in a very satisfying manner just 1 episode later. Now, some might argue that the show could benefit from condensing some of its more dull slice-of-lifey episodes to make room for more action, but those slice-of-life bits are what give the show its heart and let us connect with the characters. They're as necessary as the fighting robot bits, if not more so. They could definitely have been better written, especially from episodes 16 to 19, and maybe spread out a bit more evenly, but I think the ratio of drama to action in Franxx is, at least on paper, pretty well balanced. And on paper, if you break Darling in the Franxx down to individual components, basically all of it is really good. The character designs and art direction are striking and memorable for the most part. The animation is consistently strong, the music is incredible, the writing of individual episodes and bits of dialogue can be powerful, poetic, and genuinely funny, yet cram all of these individual elements together and what you get is a mess that is less than the sum of its parts. A lot like the other recent much hyped and much maligned mecha series, Aldnoah Zero. All of the teams working on Darling in the Franxx clearly had a lot of passion for the project, but it feels like all of them had slightly or sometimes wildly different ideas of what the show should be, and nobody ever bothered to sit down and talk to everybody and actually figure out a coherent answer to that question. If you step back and look at the product as a whole, Darling in the Franxx is kinda all the fuck over the place. Its designs and premise suggest that we're in for an over-the-top, balls-to-the-wall cavalcade of fan service and mecha action. I mean, Zero Two spends literally all of her time either naked or wearing a plug suit in the first couple episodes, yet for a show about drift-compatible teenagers piloting mechs doggy style, it's surprisingly tame. Like, yeah, there's the one episode where the goop gets on the plug suits and makes them start melting, and then the girls and boys go to war, but the aggressive sexuality and in-your-face jiggliness of stuff like Kill la Kill and Gurren Lagann just isn't there in the same way. The series makes an active effort to downplay the gynaxiness, or I guess you could say triggeriness of everything, making a statement early on that while we're going to be having a bit of fun here, we're going to be looking at the themes of sexuality through a more serious lens. This is an action drama, not an action comedy, which isn't the worst idea in the world, to be honest. It's neat to see someone take these distinctively triggered designs and ideas and use them to tell a more grounded, subdued story. And for the first 15 episodes, the romantic tension between Hiro and Zero Two and the drama that unfolds between them and their friends and the adults is legitimately gripping. But if serious drama is what you're going for, what the hell is this? What in the ever-loving fuck are you doing? Stop! When I posted my reaction to this nonsense on Twitter a few weeks ago, quite a few people brought up Gurren Lagann in response. Some just making comparisons, others using that series to defend the choices made in this one. But I don't think that comparison is fair, and I say that for two reasons. Firstly, the whole design of Strelitzia True Apus is inherently ridiculous and stupid. This is not parts of a robot rearranging themselves to look more like the person piloting it. This is a metal shell transforming into a human with flesh, blood, hair, and makeup somehow. And like, goddamn, the tiny bottles that Yazzie buys from Sephora are already crazy expensive. I don't even want to imagine what a few 100 meters worth of lipstick and eyeshadow would cost. You can't just blow a regular ass human up to planetary scale without it looking either super goofy or super creepy. I mean, that's almost half the concept of Attack on Titan. On a fundamental level, this just looks an order of magnitude dumber than Super Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann, which benefits from being made out of spiral energy and not, 100 square miles of human skin with titties the size of literal mountains. But even if True Apus didn't have a god-awful character design, Darling in the Franxx was simply not equipped to make this concept work. Not in the same way that Gurren Lagann pulled it off, anyway, because the idea of an absurdly massive transforming robot taking out thousands of spaceships at once with a barrage of lasers fueled by the power of love is right at home in an ever-escalating balls-to-the-wall action series like Gurren, but it feels about as alien as, well, sudden aliens in a moody coming-of-age teen romance story. Darling in the Franxx is not a show about pointy-haired kids in rad sunglasses making bold declarations about digging equipment with anime bravado. It's about sad teenagers arguing and crying and embracing each other, and most of what happens in the last few episodes is totally incongruous with that tone, which makes it hilarious, not moving, not exciting, hilarious when during the show's big emotional climax, the comatose girl on Earth turns to stone and reappears as a half-mechanical giantess orbiting Mars. I wasn't crying, I was laughing my ass off when everyone on Earth decided to spend hours holding hands with a rock, prompted only by a little girl saying the word darling, in order to somehow help Hiro thousands of light years away escape space hypnosis? All so that he can commit mass genocide for peace and justice. That goofiness stopped me from appreciating the moments of the show's epilogue, like showing all of Squad 13 grown up with kids, that are pretty well executed and have the potential to be really powerful. There were a few moments in the last couple episodes that almost certainly would have been really emotional for me if I was still able to care. But every time that I was about to be moved by something I was seeing, I'd remember this. Heck, sometimes the show would cut directly from a potentially affecting scene to this. And immediately, all of the emotional energy that the show had been working to build up was released through laughter instead. I've banged on for a while about this disaster, and I don't think I can overstate how stupid True Apis is or how badly it damages the integrity of the show's narrative on its own. But even before it warp jumped over all the sharks in existence, Darling in the Franxx was in trouble, because as big a problem as True Apis is, literally and figuratively, the show has a much bigger one. The script is poorly planned and fails to follow through on just about everything potentially interesting that it sets up. I've been over the messy world building and storytelling in episode 19 in depth, so I won't repeat what I said there here, but subsequent episodes of this show do nothing to remedy these problems. Not only are the reveals that follow about the true nature of Franxx robots, magma energy, and ape all painfully derivative of other better works of sci-fi, they're also super bare bones examples of those tropes that don't really explain anything. Hell, some of the reveals just create bigger plot holes, like magma energy is really the life stream, Klaxosar juice, and it provides life energy that allows the Earth to be fertile. Alright, but then, like, how did Klaxosapiens evolve and develop their civilization without already having magma energy in the Earth to allow plants to grow? What did they use to fuel their incredible, impossible technologies, like the Klaxosars themselves? You know, the giant robots that humanity, at the height of its magma energy-fueled development, still had a lot of trouble reverse engineering into Franxx? Where'd they get the energy to make those? The answer is, don't think about it. Seeing huge gaps in world building like this is frustrating, but I guess it's not super important to the narrative overall. You know what is though? The main villains of the whole story, the Verm. You guys kinda just forgot to give them a backstory, motivation, or personality. Aliens showed up out of nowhere thousands of years ago and were bad. Now thousands of years later, they're back and they're still bad. That's literally it. I mean, there's stated motivation is bringing immortal hive mind peace to the universe, but if a species turns them down, they then immediately go to war with them, which is the opposite of peace? There's no philosophical consistency there, and we're never shown any reason why they'd endanger themselves or the peace that they've worked so hard to create and they say that they want in order to achieve more peace, maybe? The Verm aren't even as fleshed out as the anti-spirals. They're really just evil for the sake of being evil because the plot needs that. Even though they have dialogue, you can barely call them characters, let alone villains. They're plot devices. Ultimately, they have about as much personality and drive as the tsunami or earthquake in a Roland Emmerich film. And because the Verm are responsible for the Klaxosars being violent as well, that kinda leaves the story without a real antagonist. And without a real villain to fight, the sole driving force of Darling ends up having to be the interpersonal drama of Squad 13, particularly the romance between Hiro and 02, and the conflicting feelings of Goro and Ichigo. And until episode 15, that does keep the show going, but after that point, 02 basically loses her whole personality. Like, in prior episodes when she's hanging out with Squad 13, she is clearly a shit disturber, poking fun and prodding at others for her own amusement, and generally being very haughty and full of herself. But after reuniting with Hiro, she's just nice to everyone all the time and doesn't stir up any conflict ever. It's like the writers think that being in a relationship somehow magically solves all of your emotional hangups and personality quirks. That's not how organic character growth works, and that lazy writing leaves the series spinning its wheels from that point forward, forcing it to focus on weaker characters who just can't carry an episode as the primary focus. Like, Mitsuru's sole defining characteristic is his man crush on Hiro, which is already basically resolved, and 3 out of the 4 paragraphs on the series wiki describing Kokoro's personality are literally just about how she wants to fuck Mitsuru and have a baby, while the other one just says that she's really nice. Not exactly the most complex characters in the world, yet our investment in their interactions and eventual wedding has to fuel the A-plot of 3 whole episodes with 0 action. When the series does eventually try to get back on track with the war against the Klaxosars, the writers, to their credit, realize that they've given us 0 reason to care about the outcome, so their solution for injecting some emotional drama into these final battles is to tear Hiro away from 02 Zero-Two again so that they can reprise episode 15's fight to bring them back together, only this time it's her saving him. And then, because they have 3 episodes to go and 0 ideas left, they do the exact same thing again, but in space this time. And if you strip those repetitive elements away, there is next to nothing in these episodes that we can be reasonably expected to give a shit about, because all of the surrounding cast basically does nothing, and nothing really happens to them. The entire time that Darling in the Franxx was running, viewers were shouting incessantly about death flags left and right and eagerly anticipating the shit just got real moment when a member of Squad 13 would finally get killed off. And it really makes sense. With such a huge cast of untrained kids fighting giant monsters, one of them has to die at some point, right? Well, apparently not. The writers clearly felt that someone had to die to raise the emotional stakes in these final episodes, because 4 significant established characters do die across these last 2 battles, but the thing is, none of the deaths are main characters. Not even any of the useless ones. Instead of taking characters who we've spent a lot of time growing to like and that our heroes have an emotional attachment to, Darling in the Franxx tries to wring some cheap, unearned tears out of the audience by killing minor villains: a big blue snake, a small blue lolly, a barely developed mad scientist, and a blonde kid who's literally never been anything but an asshole. Every last one of these characters follows the same pattern. They're introduced as some kind of threat early on in the series that Zero-Two and Hero will have to overcome, and characterized in such a way that you look forward to seeing them get their asses kicked. But then the show needs to meet a death quota, so all of a sudden they do one good thing and immediately die afterwards, and we're just expected to be sad about it because fuck if I know. Dr. Franxx is the only character out of any of them who's had more than 5 seconds of screen time where he has any chance to appear sympathetic, but his death is too hilarious to be sad. This boulder crushing him has the framing and timing of an actual Roadrunner gag. Look, just replace the sound effects. This all smacks of last-minute rewrites to me. I mean, in episode 18, the Nines are displaying fanatical devotion to Papa after he reveals that he's an evil alien and plans to blow up the whole planet. They were clearly intended at some stage to be the final bosses faced by Squad 13 and give us some mech-on-mech action before the finale, yet instead of following through on that, the show backs down, having 9 Alpha get sick and turn good for basically no reason. And it simultaneously uses the deaths of these villains to back down from killing off any members of its main cast who we actually might care about, all in order to give them a happy ending. Like, if I had to wager, I'd be willing to bet that in an earlier draft of this script, it's Mitsuru who's supposed to take the role of Hiro's male pistol, leaving Kokoro back home on Earth, and he's the one who ultimately sacrifices himself to help Hiro reach Zero-Two. Not only would that pay off the earlier setup when Mitsuru says that he wants to be Hiro's partner, it would be a lot more meaningful and emotionally satisfying for the audience than the death of this random asshole, and it would make for a much more powerful moment in both his and Kokoro's character arcs than just having him stay back at home and be a happy dad. Seriously, killing off at least some of the squad members this late in the game would give these episodes the emotional weight they so desperately need to work as the climax to this kind of melodrama. It would also shape up the cast dynamics in a way that would make these otherwise bland episode plots a little bit more interesting. Instead, the series takes cop-outs at every turn to preserve the dynamic that the writers are comfortable with, on the way to an unambiguously happy and totally uninteresting conclusion. Okay, so some people are gonna argue that Hiro and Zero-Two dying makes this ending bittersweet, but come on. All of their friends live long, happy lives without them, and they get to go off for 2 years doing exactly what they've wanted to do from moment 1 of the series. Just be alone together. They die at exactly the same time, so neither has to mourn the other. And to top it all off, their reincarnated souls are apparently cosmically intertwined so that they can be together in a time completely free of conflict in the future. Without that reincarnation scene, it would be a little ambiguously sad, but with it, you literally couldn't write a happier ending for these characters without, I don't know, making them immortal gods who get to spend all of eternity in love with each other or something. And to be clear, there's nothing wrong with ending a show at they all lived happily ever after and reincarnated happily ever after, but it's not really in line with the tone of the rest of the series, and I don't think it really says much of substance. At the end of the day, the only message that Darling in the Franxx really puts out there, despite all of its philosophical meandering, is love's good, have babies. And that's a shame, because when it started, it seemed like a show with a lot more to say. But maybe that's just because it borrowed so much from series that actually had something to say. Either way, Darling in the Franxx feels like a compromised and poorly planned work. One with no idea of how to pay off the plot points it sets up, or how to effectively use the characters and concepts that it develops. In lieu of that, the writers chose to fall back on old cliches and cop-outs, which only exacerbate those issues. Still, while the last stretch of it sucks, the first 15 episodes provide a satisfying enough emotional journey, and while it doesn't have much in the way of concrete meaning if you stop watching at that episode, hey, it doesn't if you finish the whole series either. So, if you're interested in Darling in the Franxx, I do recommend riding it out to that point for the great animation and pretty good romance, but just make sure that you disembark before the train turns into a wreck. I'm Geoff Thew, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.